1. For context, I'm a 5'2" female who couldn't handle herself in a fight against a tissue. This just happened earlier today, and I can't think of a better place to vent about it. I work for UPS as a city carrier. For those that don't know, that means I walk, a lot, and through all types of neighborhoods. That being said, I work in a relatively small town, and while there are some parts of it that are more run down, I've never had any bad encounters. Until today. The last bit of my route is 3 streets that run parallel to each other. So you walk up and down one street, drive the car to the next, and walk up and down it, etc. I'd say it's a low to middle income area, but nothing that makes you feel uneasy. Just a bunch of cheap college apartments and a few rundown houses. I'm beginning the first of 3 streets, and I see a man, maybe 20 years old, riding his bike on the opposite side of the street, but going the same direction I am. I thought nothing of it and went about my business. He ended up turning a corner at the end of the block, and I forgot about him. I'm continuing down the same street when I notice this guy is riding next to me again. I think it's a little bizarre, but figure he's just taking laps around the block or something. Mind you, it's a solid 10 degrees outside today with snow on the ground, so looking back, it's a bit strange that somebody was out for a casual bike ride. But people have done weirder things. I'm finishing up the last houses on that street and heading back to my van when I notice this dude is now going the same way I am again, even though I had turned around and started going the opposite direction now. I thought everything a coincidence until I drove to the next street over. My first stop there is an apartment box. For those who might not know, it's one huge mailbox with several mailboxes inside of it. And all that means is I have to spend a decent amount of time there, because it's maybe 16 people's mail I'm sorting. While I'm doing that, the guy shows up again and just sits on his bike, blankly staring at me from a few yards away while I work. I again give this all the benefit of the doubt, and think maybe he's just waiting for me to finish the box so he could check his mail. As I lock it up and move on to the next house, I see him following behind me. When I stop at a house to deliver, he stops in the street and stares. It's at this point I decide there is something going on that I need to distance myself from, and go back to my van, despite having almost the entire street left to deliver. I go back to the post office and tell my boss about what happened, and he agrees to have me go deliver mail for another route on the opposite side of town. I gladly do this, and it takes me maybe an hour and a half. I figured they'd trade off the mail and somebody else would go finish the small portion I had left with the creepy dude. Not so much. Once I get back to the office, I get asked to go finish the route from this morning. I was hesitant, but the point was made that it was hours later. It had started raining, because why would he be there 2 hours later, and on a bike in the rain, and that they'd send somebody to patrol the street. Fine. I head back out with a co-worker, following in another car behind me. I finish the street I had left earlier without any problem, so he heads back to the office. I move to my last street, feeling relatively at ease and starting to wonder if I overreacted this morning. I get to the end of my first half of the street, conveniently the farthest away from my vehicle that I can get during this entire ordeal. And there he is. He pops out from behind a house on his bike, riding furiously in my direction. Panic sets in. I try to stay calm and act as if I wasn't bothered by his presence at all, but he's riding right on my heels, speeding up to get in front of me, and then just blankly staring through me again, until I pass him, and the following continues. I casually put my mail into my bag so my hands are free. That way I can get to my mace, as I call my boss. I didn't want this guy to know I was panicked and calling for help, so I pretend my boss is another city carrier just a few streets away. Hey Dave, I know you're working just a couple of blocks from here, and I have a couple of really heavy packages I need you to help me deliver them. I'm on Oak Street right now, etc. My boss was so confused, he started telling me how he wasn't a few streets over, and that I was calling the wrong person, while I'm practically yelling over him, "Oh yeah, I can get the numbers off the packages. Hold on, let me get to the car. Just don't hang up yet. I can get them right now." Because I really didn't want him to hang up. This guy hadn't said a word to me, but is still right on my heels, literally. Had I stopped walking, he would have ran my ankle over. I make it back to the car and tell my boss what is actually happening, while this dude does circles around me. As I drive away down the street, I see him racing on his bike behind me, chasing my car. I make a few turns down blocks, trying to see if I can lose him, and he's behind me the entire time until I reach the busy main road, where he stops. The cops were called, and I was instructed to once again return to the street to finish the mail, with cops patrolling the area to hopefully bait this dude into getting caught. No surprise, but he didn't show up. No idea how this situation is going to get handled yet, but hopefully something gets done. Update, January 10th. Nothing changed for me at work. My bosses didn't seem to care about what had happened to me, and unfortunately I'm not in a position to just up and quit my job, although I am looking for a new one, and I have ended up having to grin and bear being put back on the same route that all of this happened on. It's been 2 weeks since the original encounter, and up until Wednesday I thought maybe the person was just trying to mess with me, and now he was over it because I hadn't seen him again. I was on my last street for the day, and starting to loosen up since I was about to turn around and head back up the street to my vehicle, when I saw him. The car is a little more than 600 feet away, and he was standing on the sidewalk midway between it and me, just staring at me. I immediately tried to calculate my options. I decided it was either attempt to get past him to my car, or pick a random house and start knocking, hoping to God somebody answered the door quickly. Fight or flight kicked in, and all I could think about was getting back to my car and getting the hell out, so that's what I tried to do. I crossed the street to create at least some distance between us, and was sort of relieved when I saw that he didn't follow suit. At this point, he's still a good 300 feet away from me, and I'm not sure why, but something was telling me to just avoid direct eye contact and keep walking. As I got closer to him, however, I could see that he was masturbating. Right there on the sidewalk in broad daylight, just staring at me. Fear took over and I immediately started sprinting, but I was met with the hair-raising sound of his shoes echoing mine. He was screaming, "Hey, you, girl!" and something else, but due to adrenaline and sheer panic, it just sounded like muffled noise that I can't recall. I thought about turning around to mace him as he was getting closer and closer to me. But at the moment running was working, and I didn't want to risk some horrible horror movie scenario where I trip. Luckily, running worked and I got back into my car and locked it to call the police. I don't know why I didn't move the car immediately. I guess I was too focused on getting officers there to help me, but I don't know. As I'm on the phone with dispatch, the guy is just circling the car, dick out, making obscene gestures and trying to get me to look at him. Finally, something clicks into my head that I'm not trapped there, and I can, in fact, just drive away. So I do. I go up the street and turn into a busy apartment complex to talk to the officer that showed up. I watched the guy turn around and run back into the house he was originally standing in front of. So for those of us wondering how the hell he found me the second time in my last story, he lives right there on that street. Cops followed up with me later that evening and informed me that they had made contact with the individual, and that they'll be getting a hold of me soon. But so far that's all I've heard. As far as my bosses are concerned, they aren't taking anything seriously since the guy didn't physically touch me. Christ. And have scheduled me back on that route next week. I'm looking for a new job, so hopefully this is the last update you'll hear about this. Fingers crossed. 2. This was about 10 or 11 years ago when I was around 13 and had just started to go to martial arts classes. What made me want to go there was the fact that my brother Adam, who was 3 years older than me, had started a couple of years before me and seemed to really enjoy it. And also he was nearing black belt level. Relevant. So classes were divided into age groups, so I was never really in the same classes as Adam, but we would often wait around for each other and walk home together, as it was a long and boring walk home. Whenever I would walk home with my brother, he would tell me about Sally from his class, who, to put it politely, seemed like she wasn't all there, but would obsess over Adam during and after classes. We would often joke about it with my family, teasing my brother about his admirer, but he wrote it off as a lonely girl seeking friendship and guidance because my brother was much more skilled than Sally. Then she started walking home with us. It wasn't like we could shake her off. Her class was the same as my brother's, and she walked the same way, and 13-year-old me thought nothing of it. Yeah, she was kind of weird, but hey, I was never the coolest kid either, so whatever. Although I was young, I even started to pick up on strange things about her. Her eyes reminded me of that of a fish, always wide and emotionless, like she was waiting for you to speak to her. Her face was pale and her hair was dark brown and almost always tied back in a frizzy bun. Additionally, she was short and chubby, so yeah, Adam was never interested in her like that. I believe she also had self-harm scars, but I could be mistaken. Her behavior seemed to go from lonely stranger to obsessive stalker, almost overnight. She started to walk Adam right to our front door when she lived in the opposite direction. I remember at the time my brother used to wear those black hoodies with the anarchist symbol on the front, and she started turning up to classes with that same symbol drawn on her hand. I seem to remember asking her what it meant, as she had drawn it wrong, and she looked at me with those fish eyes and said, "Eddie," Adam's nickname, "you must understand that my brother is very kind-hearted, and it would take a lot for him to tell someone to fuck off. Besides, she was harmless, right?" I remember Adam not waiting for me after his class one night. I went to mine and Sally waited for me and walked home with me, all the while asking questions about my brother. I remember my dad was so angry with Adam for letting me walk home with that weirdo. I seem to remember finding the whole thing rather amusing and not at all worrying. In my mind at the time, the idea of some fat goth girl being obsessed with my brother was hilarious. But then, she started visiting the house. She would regularly come around to our house and ask for Adam. My dad would always answer and send her on her way because, like I said, Adam had a kind heart. My dad, on the other hand, is a middle-aged skinhead tattooist who was pretty ruthless when he wanted to be. No matter how many times he told her to go away and leave him alone, she would just stare in an emotionless manner and ask when he will be free. I remember one time in particular, she asked to come in and my dad said that Adam was busy cleaning his room, to which she said, "I'll help him," to which my dad told her to fuck off. The visit seemed to come to a head when she came to the door once, and I didn't hear what was said, however. I remember my dad shouting and swearing and telling her to fuck off and not come back. I can't imagine how awkward her and Adam's classes must have been. However, she was not the type of girl to take a hint. Soon after the visit, she started standing across the road from our house, alone, for fucking hours on end. It was winter, and she would stand across from our house, in the same spot daily for no apparent reason. I remember starting to feel pretty nervous at this point. I also remember my dad doing a bit of his own brand of sign language towards her whenever she was caught, but she would never bat an eyelid. Just stand there, staring. At the time, I had gotten into using my dad's eBay account to buy things online with my pocket money, wrestling figures. And as I was such an impatient child, I would often wake up at the crack of dawn to wait for my post to arrive. It seemed my post came at around 7 a.m. back then, sometimes. One particular morning, as I sat patiently with a cup of coffee staring at my letterbox, you could see it from my living room sofa, expecting my Hardy Boys double pack to come any minute, I heard a light tap on the door. Now, my letterbox was big enough to fit parcels through, and even at 13, I just knew a postman wouldn't knock in that low manner. About 7 consecutive taps like they were being made by a single knuckle. Now, this scared me. Everyone in my house was still asleep, and my once cozy living room felt like a panic room. To be honest, I never even thought about Sally, until those pale, stumpy fingers came through the letterbox like 4 white slugs and dropped an envelope into my house. My heart froze. I thought, oh God, maybe it was just the postman. But where was my parcel? I waited about a good 10 minutes, then I slowly crept towards the door, terrified of the box flying open and those piercing fish eyes catching sight of me. I picked up the envelope and read the back. One word: Adam. I picked up the letter, half excited and half nervous. It was a regular letter, but a fat one. Do I open it? What the hell could be in there? Like I said, I was an impatient child. I went straight to the bathroom and sat on the toilet lid, letter in hand. Nobody knew that it had came, so therefore nobody could have known I'd taken it. That was good enough for me. I tore it open, and I kid you not, there were about 10 pieces of paper inside the envelope. My memory about this is vague, but suffice it to say that it would be easier to tell you what wasn't in there than what was. She had rambled on about the martial arts school, saying how Adam had made her into this amazing person, and some things about running away together, and in capital letters, "I love you, Adam." There were pictures and everything. I only skimmed through this mountain of a love letter because I was convinced that any second now somebody would come to the bathroom and catch me with this sinister letter. But there were so many little bits of paper and notes that I couldn't exactly hide them in a bin or anywhere. And I would have got in a lot of trouble for opening my brother's mail, especially in this situation. I ripped all the papers up into tiny pieces and flushed them down the toilet, confused and shocked. I told myself they were secretly in a relationship and Adam was just embarrassed because why else would someone keep writing letters? In hindsight, 13-year-old me probably didn't understand most of the things that were said, and to be honest, I didn't want to feel any more guilty. This happened almost daily, the same routine, and all the letters were along the same lines. She must have started writing them as soon as she had posted the previous one. I would read them and flush them away. I know they came at other times too, because my brother and dad found letters also. I remember one of the mornings I crept towards the door and peeped through the little peephole, only to see her warped, distorted face staring back at me like she saw I was looking. This all only ended because my brother left the martial arts center, as he had reached advanced black belt, and it made no sense to keep paying a monthly fee when there wasn't much left to learn. I myself left after an embarrassing incident caused me to want to leave. Shortly after this, we moved house too, and this was before the days of social media were really prominent. Thank God, really, I can only imagine the amounts of fake accounts Sally would have made to stay in contact with my brother. Speaking of which, she sent me a friend request last week. It concerns me that so much about this situation will have been hidden from me, as I was always the baby of the family. A lot of this doesn't add up to me, and I haven't spoke to my brother or dad about this since it happened, so there's probably a lot of missing details and incidents. I'm not sure I want to know about them. Any questions, just let me know. Sally, can we please not meet again? 3. This happened to me 4 years ago. At the time, I was 17 years old and had been offered a job at a classmate's mom's mini-market. Here in my country, I'm in South America for context, those are pretty common, and sell everything from frozen food to bathroom necessities. Usually people will build a tiny separate building next to their house for it, and work the store themselves. Every condo and village, these seem to mean something entirely different here, has about one on every main street. Anyway, my classmate's mom offered me to work there Monday to Saturday, 8 AM to 4 PM, with some very good cash and free lunch. He lived about a mile away, and my house was directly connected to his by a cycle path, so I would get to use my brand new bike as a means of transportation. Basically the perfect job for a teenager. I did not enjoy working there, don't get me wrong. I actually like working and I like money, but this store had too much going on in it. So I had to make ice cream cones, bag chicken breasts, laminate ham and cheese. Again, I think those things already come laminated in most countries. Work the coffee machine and keep everything immaculate and in order, while checking that all the stuff this lady had in her store hadn't expired. Keep in mind I'm talking January of 2014, and I found a bag of sausages expired in January 2013, being sold during my first week there. Overall, it wasn't really abusive. She just didn't know how to manage her store. Or her money. That's a completely different story though, but by the way, ex-boss, let's not meet ever again, because God, your store was unsanitary as fuck. Anyhow, one of my many jobs there was keeping an eye on fruit and veggies, meaning checking for the rotten ones, and throwing them away and refilling the goddamn tomatoes if the shelf was emptying. There was only one huge problem for me, as a 5'4", 120-pound girl, the 45-pound potato sack. For context, right in front of the store there was a huge green area, and we have public workers, gardeners, who take care of them. They have one specific person in charge of specific areas. So the same man would always be there doing his job. Let's call him Pete. Back when only my boss and her family worked their store, they would ask Pete for help to take the potatoes from the car and drop them at the back of the store. He would always help, and the only thing he asked for as payment was a cup of coffee and a sandwich. This man was in his late 50s, didn't go through education, he couldn't read, and usually asked me to read the newspaper to him. And even though he didn't seem to have any kind of mental handicap, he would not understand that there are limits to how you approach people, and what is and isn't appropriate. More on that later. Anyway, whenever we had to take the potatoes out of the car, my boss would phone him, and he would come in quickly as he had a red bike with an engine attached to it. Everyone was comfortable with him. He was just an old man who helped with the heavier duties, and asked for very little in return. As I started learning the job, my boss wouldn't be around to help me when I had doubts, meaning I was completely alone in the store. I would struggle by myself on moving the potatoes from the back of the store, and often would lose a piece of fingernail or something. Because of this, whenever she left, she would ask the gardener to keep an eye on me and help me with it. The problem began pretty quickly. I have interacted many times with people with conditions, and I'm not trying to be rude, but when someone has some kind of mental health issue or syndrome, even if they can normally function, and even have jobs, you can kinda tell. And I assure you this man was completely healthy and normal. Looking back, I think he was using his lack of education as a way to shield his behavior. And so people pitied him and felt guilt for not liking him, and he would try to take advantage of the girls who worked there. There had been some before me, I never met them. He would fixate on certain topics, always repeat the same conversations, become way too close to me and my co-worker, another classmate. He would stand up too close and talk of some very personal problems with me. Keep in mind he was 30 plus years older, I was underage. He became another one of the many unpleasant duties I had to deal with on a daily basis. As weeks progressed, he gave me his phone number so I would call him when I needed assistance. I never called him. Because I of course didn't want to be around him, and because I'm the kind of person who thinks they don't need help. When he realized I wasn't calling him, he tried to push me into giving him my number. I never did. So he would stay right in front of the store and come in every 20 minutes. He gave me a bicycle seat, and even though I told him I didn't want it, he could keep it, thanks a lot, he removed my original brown seat and put the one he got me. He would tell me he was single and owned a house. He would call me pretty and try to play with my hair, etc. I was severely uncomfortable around him, but nobody seemed to be bothered by any of those things. It made me feel very awkward and guilty for feeling these things, which only contributed to the already disappointing feeling of working in this unsanitary place. I decided to just do my best to ignore him. When he realized I was distant, he started accusing me of being mean with my boss, but nothing else. It was only a summer job, so I thought I just had to stand it for a month, and it would be over, but oh no. One good day, 2 weeks before I had to leave, he tells me he is in love with me. Dead serious, too. I was 17 and had no experience with love and such. I had never had anyone tell me something like that. Usually, I am a very short-tempered person and snap easily, and could have told him to stop fucking with me, but this just left me speechless. He had already been flirting with me for 2 months, even though I was underage. He had given me presents. I had seen him lift 2 potato sacks on one shoulder, and he could certainly do as he pleased with me. I started to sweat. I was feeling violated, even when he wasn't trying to approach me. But he just stared so deeply into my eyes that it was clear he was trying to make me feel inferior. I didn't know what to do, and he wasn't leaving the store. My boss arrived like 10 minutes after this, so he started chatting with her, but I was left feeling violated for the rest of my shift. 2 weeks after my contract ended for the summer, I thought I would never see him again, but again, oh no. There are green areas where I live too. One day as I was walking my dog, I see a bright red bike with an engine attached to it, next to some swings in the park. I recognize it. It was his bike. He saw me and ran towards me, crossing the street even though cars were coming. I have 3 dogs. One is a pit bull mix, and the other a husky mix, the third one a Yorkie before you ask. And none of them liked him. You would think my big-ass dogs would stop him from standing too close to me, but no, and he only took a few steps back when my pit tried to bite his hand. I had never seen them so angry. He told me his boss had realized he was slacking on his job to help at the store, and he didn't like that. So he was moved to another area away from the store. My area. He insisted on asking where my house was, just like he insisted on my phone number back in the day. My house was a quarter of a mile away. I told him I lived in the opposite direction because, of course, I didn't want to tell him where I lived. That day I told my mom about this creepy old man and all the things he had done at that point. She yelled at me for not snapping at him or something, like she didn't understand this man could carry 2 of those potato sacks on one. I asked her not to tell my dad because he would get mad at me. Yes, they are the kind of parents who get mad at their kids for things that aren't their fault. They once yelled at my brother when he had his phone stolen on the bus by a guy with a knife. Mom did tell, though. The next day my father mysteriously offered to walk the dogs, and the day after that, Pete wasn't around to be seen. Mom told me later that my dad approached Pete and threatened him. Knowing my dad, he probably told him about his military background and his gun. Pete asked to be moved to another area right there, with his boss on speaker and my dad listening. My city is pretty small, so I still see him when I go out on longer walks, about 4 miles from my house. But he no longer tries to talk to me. Instead, he keeps his head down and starts moving faster to the opposite direction. Goodbye, you old creep. Let's not fucking meet again. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 257. Thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Now, I would like to apologize to those of you who were expecting a glitch video today. It's entirely my fault. I left it a bit too late before sourcing stories for this week. But as I was recording for this video, some responses started to come back, so hopefully by next Thursday I'll have enough to do one for next week. But I think we had a good selection of stories this week for today's video. As I was reading that story about the cyclist, it was called The Cyclist. When I first saw the title, I went into it expecting something like a real-world version of The Solitary Cyclist, which is a Sherlock Holmes story by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. However, in that story, nobody whipped their dick out. Surprisingly, in a Sherlock Holmes story, there were no willies wiggling in any way at all. Okay, so there we go. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.